The divorce papers still had that fresh ink smell when I tossed them into my leather bag that morning outside my apartment window. Des Moines was dressed in its autumn finery, golden leaves and pumpkins spiced everything, while inside I was draped. In yesterday's sweatpants and emotional devastation, my MacBook screen glowed with the same blank document that had been mocking me for 17 days straight. Deadline 2 weeks, word count 0, Ruby Torres. I whispered to my reflection in the coffee pot, "You've officially hit rock bottom." My phone buzzed Scott again. I let it ring while counting backwards from 10, a technique my therapist suggested, but that never actually worked. The buzzing stopped, then immediately started again. "What?" I snapped, cradling the phone between ear and shoulder while pouring coffee that had been sitting in the pot since yesterday. "Just checking you signed everything," Scott said, his voice carrying that newfound confidence he'd developed since leaving me for his 27-year-old assistant. "My liar needs. I signed your damn papers." The coffee tasted like liquid betrayal. 15 years reduced to a signature congratulations. The silence that followed felt like a bruise. "Ruby, we both know this is better for you." "Absolutely." I hung up and hurled the phone onto the couch where it bounced harmlessly onto a pile of unwashed laundry. My editor's email popped up on screen where, "Eyes my manuscript, your career isn't going to resurrect itself." Ruby, the walls of our apartment seemed to inch closer with each passing second. Framed travel photographs from better times. Morocco, Thailand, Paris, places where I'd found my voice as a writer, places where Scott and I had been happy, or at least I thought we had been. The keyboard clicked under my fingertips as I typed hotels in Des Moines into the search bar. I needed somewhere anywhere that didn't echo with memories. My cursor hovered over the Marriott, the Hilton, the predictable chain options, until a small ad caught my eye. Pinewood, and discovered the story within my credit card was out before I could question the impulse. 1 room, indefinite stay, the confirmation. Email arrived with a photo of a Victorian house that had seen better decades. Perfect, a broken down writer and a broken down inn poetic, if nothing else. Packing took less than 15 minutes. I threw clothes into a suitcase, my laptop into its case, and the half-finished bottle of whiskey into my purse. The manuscript could wait. My life was waiting first. The taxi driver raised an eyebrow at my destination, Pinewood, and, "You sure, lady, that place has been barely hanging on since the highway bypass." "I'm sure," I said more confidently than I felt about anything in months. Rain started falling as we drove away from downtown. Fat drops that blurred the world outside my window into watercolor smudges. The rhythmic swish of the windshield wipers matched my heartbeat, steady but hollow. The driver turned on the radio, and some saccharine love song filled the space between us. I closed my eyes against the lyrics. When we pulled up to the inn, twilight was settling over its gabled roof and wraparound. Porch peeling paint, creaking steps. A single light glowed in the entrance hall, amber against the gathering darkness. The door swung open before I could knock, and I found myself staring into the most intense blue eyes I'd ever seen, bright as corn. Flowers rimmed with something like suspicion, or perhaps just weariness. Those eyes belonged to a woman about my age. Her brunette hair twisted into a messy bun, her frame slight but strong. Checking in, she asked, her voice lower than I'd expected, husky. "Like someone who didn't use it often, Ruby Torres," I said, extending my hand. I booked on mine. Definitely, her handshake was brief but firm. Isabel Clark, owner indefinitely, is an interesting reservation term. A crash from somewhere inside made her turn, revealing a delicate tattoo at the nape of her neck. Some kind of bird in flight. "Last room available," she said, grabbing my suitcase before I could protest. "Follow me." I stepped into the inn, the scent of old wood, lemon polish, and something else. Something like sorrow filling my lungs. The rain outside intensified, drumming against the windows. "Like impatient fingers, you're running from something," Isabel said as we climbed the creaking staircase. "Not a question. Just looking for a story," I lied. She unlocked a door at the end of the hallway and handed me an actual metal key, no electronic. Cards here. Everyone who comes to Pinewood is looking for something. Nobody admits what it really is. As she walked away, her footsteps fading into the building's size. I noticed she'd left something on the dresser, a small leather-bound journal with my name written on the first page, an elegant script, beneath it a note, sometimes. The stories we need to write are the ones we're most afraid to tell. I ran my fingers over the embossed cover, a chill racing up my spine that had nothing to do with the room's drafty window. How could she possibly have known I was a writer? Morning sunlight filtered through threadbare curtains, painting patterns across the antique quilt covering my bed. I'd slept better than I had in months, as if the pinewood Inn's creaky foundations had somehow steadied my own. The leather journal still sat on the dresser untouched since last night. I'd been too unnerved to write in it, choosing instead to polish off the whiskey while staring at the water stain on the ceiling that resembled my home state of Michigan. A knock startled me from my thoughts. Breakfast ends at 9 o'clock came. Isabel's voice through the door. 7 minutes. I scrambled into jeans and a sweater, splashing cold water on my face before heading downstairs. The dining room was empty except for an elderly couple whispering over toast and a businessman jabbing at his laptop. The scent of cinnamon and coffee hung in the air, making my stomach growl embarrassingly loud. Isabel emerged from what I assumed was the kitchen, carrying a tray with a single coffee mug and a plate of something that made my mouth water. She wore faded jeans and a flannel shirt with rolled sleeves revealing forearms corded with lean muscle. A woman who worked with her hands. Last breakfast serving, she said, placing the tray before me. Blueberry pancakes, local maple syrup, thanks. I wrapped my fingers around the steaming mug. Do you always personally serve your guests? Only the ones who look like they might be trouble. A hint of something was an amusement crossed her face. The pancakes were incredible fluffy islands in the sea of amber syrup. I closed my eyes, savoring the first real pleasure I'd felt in weeks. Good? Isabel asked, still hovering nearby. Damn good. I admitted. Why aren't there more guests here? With food like this, you should be packed. Her expression shuddered. The highway bypassed the recession. Take your pick. The elderly couple stood to leave, nodding politely to Isabel. The businessman never looked up when they'd gone. Isabel sat across from me, her posture stiff as if unused to taking a seat in her own dining room. The journal, I said between bites. How did you know I write your reservation? Said Ruby Torres. I read your Morocco book. She shrugged as if embarrassed by the admission. I liked how you described the desert stars. Something warm that had nothing to do with the coffee spread through my chest. That was my first book before the travel series took off. Before you started writing with your husband, the question held no judgment, just observation. I nearly choked on my coffee ex-husband as of yesterday. And yes, Scott and I wrote the travel series together. So now you're here in the least exotic location possible, writing alone. Trying to, I said, mostly failing. Splendidly. Isabel stood abruptly. I need to fix the radiator in room 4. Checkout is at 11 o'clock. Check in after 3 o'clock. There's decent Wi-Fi in the library downstairs before I could respond. She was gone, leaving me with half-eaten pancakes and the distinct feeling I'd been dismissed. After breakfast, I explored the inn. The place was a Victorian beauty, gone to seed, ornate woodwork beneath peeling paint, stained glass windows clouded with decades of dust. The library turned out to be a small sitting room with 2 sagging armchairs and 3 bookshelves of aging paperbacks, but it had character, the kind travel writers like me were supposed to appreciate. I settled into what looked like the more stable armchair and opened my laptop. The blank document stared back at me, the cursor blinking in accusation. An hour later, I had written exactly 17 words, all of them terrible. A crash and a curse from upstairs broke my concentration. Following the noise, I found myself outside room 4, where Isabel knelt beside an ancient radiator, a wrench in one hand and a bloodied finger in her mouth. Need help? I asked, she startled. No, then perhaps remembering I was a paying guest, added, "It's fine, just a cut." Let me see. I knelt beside her, taking her hand before she could protest. The cut wasn't deep, but was bleeding steadily. First aid kit downstairs office behind the reception desk. I retrieved the kit and returned to find Isabel still on the floor, looking annoyed at both the radiator and her injury. "I could have handled it," she said as I cleaned the cut with antiseptic. "I'm sure you handle everything," I replied, noticing calluses on her palms and a constellation of small scars across her knuckles. "But sometimes it's nice to accept help." Our eyes met briefly as I wrapped a bandage around her finger. Her gaze felt physical somehow, like being touched. "Thanks," she mumbled when I finished. "Were you actually writing downstairs or just staring at a blank screen?" I laughed, surprised by her perception, that obvious everyone at Creative Crossroads has the same look, like they're drowning in possibilities and can't choose which one to breathe. The metaphor struck me as oddly poetic coming from this Decatur turned innkeeper. "You seem to know a lot about creative struggles for someone who runs a hotel." Something flickered across her face, a recognition or remembrance, but she turned back to the radiator before I could identify it. "The inn keeps me busy enough without writing failures too." That evening I heard music from downstairs haunting. Piano notes drifted up the staircase, pulling me from my room. I followed the melody to a small alcove off the main lobby where Isabel sat at an upright piano, her back to me, fingers dancing over yellowed ivory keys. I stood silently, watching the curve of her neck and the way her body swayed with the music, something classical, but played with raw emotion that classical recordings often lacked. When she hit the final chord, I couldn't help but applaud softly. Isabel spun around, clearly startled. I thought everyone was asleep. "That was beautiful," I said, moving closer. "Chopin debuts." She closed the piano, lit a flush creeping up her neck. "My grandmother taught me." The piano was hers. We stood in awkward silence until I gestured to the bench. After a moment's hesitation, she slid over. I sat beside her, our shoulders almost touching in the narrow space. My fingers found the keys, playing the simple melody my own grandmother had taught me. Isabel watched my hands, her breathing changing subtly. When our eyes met, something electric passed between us. She leaned closer. An almost imperceptible movement, and I found myself mirroring it. The front door chimed, shattering the moment as a late arriving guest entered the lobby. Isabel stood, quickly straightening her shirt. "Good night, Miss Torres," she said, formally striding toward the entrance. "Ruby," I called after her. "Just Ruby." She paused, not looking back. "Good night, Ruby." As I climbed the stairs to my room, I realized my heart was racing, and for the first time since signing those divorce papers, it wasn't from anxiety or grief. It was from something dangerously close to possibility. A week into my stay at Pinewood Inn, I'd written exactly 0 publishable words. My editor had left 3 increasingly panicked voicemails, but I couldn't bring myself to call back. With nothing to report instead, I found myself wandering the streets of Des Moines, searching for something I couldn't name. The December air bit at my cheeks as I stepped out of the inn that morning. Isabel stood on a stepladder at the entrance, struggling to hang a modest wreath on the door. "Need a spotter?" I called up to her. She glanced down, her breath visible in the cold. "I've been doing this alone for 3 years now, and that means you have to keep doing it alone." I raised an eyebrow, standing firm until she sighed and nodded. I steadied the ladder while she secured the wreath, noticing how her hair fell across her face when she leaned forward, how she tucked it behind her ear with unconscious grace. "Any good writer spots in town?" I asked when she descended, someplace with enough ambient noise to drown out my self-loathing, but not so much that I can't focus. "There's a holiday market downtown," she said, after a moment's consideration might provide some inspiration. The way she said the last word made it sound like she thought my case was hopeless. I shrugged. "Worth a shot. Where exactly?" "I'm headed there myself in an hour." "Need decorations?" She hesitated, then added, You could join me, the market. Sprawled across the town square, wooden stalls adorned with twinkling lights despite the daylight, the scent of pine needles, cinnamon and roasting chestnuts perfumed the air. Children darted between adults, their laughter rising above the general murmur of commerce. Isabel walked beside me, arms crossed as if holding herself, and she wore a blue knit hat that brought out the color of her eyes, making them impossibly bluer. So, what are you looking for? I asked as we navigated the crowd, ornaments, lights. The inn hasn't had a proper Christmas tree since. She trailed off since my divorce. She stopped at a stall selling hand-wound glass ornaments, the colored spheres. Catching light and transforming it into rainbows on the white tablecloth, I picked up a delicate blue bird. This reminds me of your tattoo. Her hand went instinctively to the back of her neck. You noticed that writer's habit. I noticed details. I smiled, putting the ornament back. What kind of bird is it? Bluebird, symbol of happiness. A ruffled smile touched her lips. Seemed like a good idea at 25. And now I know happiness isn't something that lands on your shoulder just because you wish for it. Her words hung between us, weighted with experience. I could suddenly relate to all too well. Maybe some mulled wine would help the shopping expedition, I suggested, nodding toward a stall. Emitting clouds of fragrant steam, 2 steaming cups later, we found ourselves laughing at a display of knitted holiday hats for dogs. The wine had put color in Isabel's cheeks and loosened something in her posture. She looked younger, unburdened. So, what did you do before innkeeping? I asked as we browsed a table of hand-dipped candles. She picked up a pinnated one, inhaling deeply. I was an architect, commercial projects, mainly. That explains all the structural muttering I hear when you're fixing things. She smiled, a real one this time. Just because the inn is falling apart doesn't mean I don't know exactly how it should be fixed. Why not fix it properly than money? She shrugged. Dreams. Pick your obstacle. We moved to a stall selling wooden ornaments, the vendor carving them on the spot with practiced hands. Isabel selected several, each exchange with the vendor's brief but courteous. She clearly came here often enough to be recognized, but not enough to be drawn into conversations. At a table of handcrafted snowflakes, our fingers brushed as we reached for the same delicate creation. The contact was brief but electric, sending a jolt up my arm that had nothing to do with static. Electricity. Sorry. We both said simultaneously, then laughed awkwardly. You take it. I insisted. For the tree at the end. She agreed, then paused. Would you want to help decorate it tonight, maybe? The vulnerability in her question caught me off guard. I liked that. We continued through the market bags, growing heavier with purchases. Isabel stopped suddenly at a small booth selling leather-bound journals. To replace the one you're not using, she said, selecting one with an embossed cover like Rolling Waves. How do you know? I'm not using it because you're still walking around looking like someone stole your voice. She paid the vendor before I could protest, handing me the wrapped package. Consider it research material for your next book. The afternoon light was fading when we headed back, the temperature dropping sharply. Isabel walked closer to me than before our arms. Occasionally brushing, each contact sent tiny shivers across my skin that had nothing to do with the cold back. At the inn, I helped Isabel carry in her purchases. The lobby was empty, most guests out for dinner or holiday activities. I'll get the tree set up, she said, removing her coat. Come down in an hour. I'll make hot chocolate. I nodded, clutching my new journal as I headed upstairs. For the first time since arriving at Pinewood, I felt an urge to write. Not my overdue manuscript, but something personal, something true. When I returned downstairs, the lobby had transformed. A 7FT pine stood in the bay, window, its fresh scent filling the air. Boxes of ornaments lay open on the floor, and strands of lights waited to be untangled. Isabel knelt by an old record player, selecting vinyl from a dusty stack. Is that hot chocolate spiked? I asked, noticing 2 mugs on the coffee table, bourbon. She confirmed. A soft jazz filled the room. My grandmother's recipe for tree trimming. We worked in companionable silence, occasionally brushing hands as we reached into boxes or adjusted the same branch Isabel methodically checked each string of lights before hanging them, her focus absolute. You're good at this, I observed. I like things that can be fixed with enough care and attention, she replied softly, when the last ornament was placed the blue glass. Bird I'd admired at the market, Isabel stepped back, satisfaction evident in her posture. It's beautiful, I whispered, the twinkling lights reflecting in her eyes when she turned to me. First tree in the lobby in 3 years, she said. Thank you. We stood close, the scent of pine and chocolate and her subtle perfume making me slightly dizzy. Or maybe it was the bourbon. Or maybe it was the way she looked at me like I was a puzzle she was trying to solve. Isabel. I began, not sure what I was going to say next. She reached up slowly, her fingers barely brushing my cheek as she tucked a strand of hair behind my ear. The touch was feather light but sent heat coursing through me. Maybe we both needed a little Christmas, she whispered, her eyes dropping to my lips for just a moment before she stepped away, busying herself with gathering empty boxes. I stood, frozen heart hammering against my ribs, wondering if I'd imagined that moment of connection and why I so desperately hoped I hadn't. I woke to the sound of my laptop pinging with an email notification. My editor, no doubt, ready to eviscerate me for missing another check-in. But when I rolled over and squinted at the screen, I was surprised to see it was from Scott. Need to talk important publishing matters. Call me. I deleted it without responding. Let him stew. Whatever publishing matters he needed to discuss could wait until I figured out what the hell I was doing with my life and why I couldn't stop thinking about the way Isabel had almost touched my lips last night. The leather journal she'd given me lay open beside my bed, filled with 3 pages of scribbled thoughts. Not my book, not even close, but the first real writing I'd done in months. Something about Pinewood Inn was unlocking doors inside me I thought permanently sealed. Downstairs, the lobby hummed with activity. A family checking out, an older couple asking about local restaurants, and a harried businessman demanding better Wi-Fi. Isabel handled them all with the same efficient, slightly distant courtesy. She caught my eye over the family's heads and gave a small nod of acknowledgement. Nothing in her expression betrayed that anything unusual had passed between us last night, and I felt a stab of disappointment. I slipped out the front door, needing fresh air and coffee. The local diner 2 blocks away made a decent brew and had the advantage of not being populated by people I was actively avoiding, namely Isabel and her confusing signals. You the writer staying at Pinewood? Asked the waitress as she refilled my cup for the 3rd time. Her name tag read Darlene, that obvious small town Isabel mentioned a writer was staying. Darlene winked. Sad you were pretty too. I nearly choked on my coffee. She doesn't talk much, that one. Keeps to herself since her divorce. Darlene topped off my cup, unasked 3 years back. Messy business with that husband of hers left her with a dying inn and a mountain of debt. I shouldn't ask, I really shouldn't. What happened? You as an investor promised to turn the inn into some boutique hotel chain property. Instead, he stripped what assets he could and disappeared when the economy tanked. Darlene shook her head. Isabel had put everything into that place. Her inheritance, her savings from her architect days. That's awful, I murmured, pieces falling into place. The peeling paint, the ancient radiators, the empty rooms. She keeps it going through sheer force of will. Darlene lowered her voice. Between you and me, I don't think it'll last another year without some miracle. I returned to the inn with my head buzzing, not just from caffeine. Isabel was nowhere to be seen. But I found Lucas, her cousin, who occasionally helped at the front desk sorting mail. She's in the basement, he said before I could ask, checking the boiler again. I found her in a dusty, dimly lit room, surrounded by tools and muttering at an ancient piece of machinery that looked like it belonged in a museum. Need any help? I asked, Isabel, startled. Then straightened, wiping her hands on a rag. Unless you're secretly a boiler repair expert, probably not. I heard about what happened with your ex-husband. Her face shuddered immediately. Town gossip travels fast. I know something about being betrayed by a spouse. I offered mine, left me for his assistant after using my success to boost his career. Isabel's expression softened slightly. Seems we have that in common, then want to talk about it right or here. Good listener by trade. She sighed, tossing. The wrench aside, not much to tell. Met Daniel in Chicago when I was designing office buildings. He had vision term money. Or so I thought when my grandmother died and left me this place. He convinced me we should renovate it together. She gestured at the decrepit boiler. You can see how well that turned out. You're still here, though, still fighting for it. It's all I have left. The simplicity of her statement hit me harder than any dramatic declaration could have. We fell silent, the ancient boiler occasionally groaning like it was commiserating. I started writing, I said finally. Not the book my publisher wants, but something. Isabel's smile transformed her face. The journal worked then. Why did you really give it to me? She considered the question, choosing her words carefully. I recognize people at crossroads. I've been there myself. Sometimes all you need is a blank page to find your way again. Something about her quiet understanding broke through walls I'd built around myself. Since the divorce, words I'd been holding back poured out about Scott's betrayal, about our writing partnership that had become increasingly one-sided, about my fear that I'd never create anything worthwhile alone. Isabel listened without interrupting, her blue eyes intent on my face. When I finally ran out of steam, she simply said, "You're stronger than you think." Your voice was always the heart of those books. Ruby, anyone who's read them knows that. How would you know? I challenged, I told you. I read your Morocco book years before the travel series. It was raw and real, and yours alone. Her belief in me felt like sunshine after months of rain. I hadn't realized how desperately I needed someone, this woman specifically, to see me the real. Me beneath the commercial success and recent failure. We emerged from the basement together, a tentative understanding between us. The lobby was quiet, afternoon sunlight slanting through the newly decorated Christmas tree, casting colored shadows across the worn carpet. I should get some work done, I said reluctantly. Isabel nodded. I've got rooms to clean, but maybe dinner later. There's leftover stew, I'd like that. That evening, I actually wrote real sentences, real paragraphs, not the travel book my publisher wanted, but something more personal. A story about finding yourself in unexpected places, about the courage it takes to start over, Isabel. And I ate stew in the deserted dining room after the few guests had gone out or retreated to their rooms. She told me about growing up in Chicago, about architecture school, about her dream of restoring Pinewood to its former glory. Why not sell it? I asked. Start fresh somewhere else. It was my grandmother's life. She raised me here every summer. Isabel's eyes took on a faraway look. She believed places have souls, that this inn has seen enough love and loss and life to have developed its own heartbeat. You believe that too? I said, not a question I have to otherwise. I'm just a failed architect maintaining a crumbling building for no reason. Later, when a sudden power outage plunged the inn into darkness, we found ourselves sitting on the lobby floor by the fireplace, emergency candles casting our faces in golden light. The other guests had long since gone to bed with flashlights and apologies from Isabel. Truth, I said, warming my hands by the flames. What was the happiest day of your life? Isabel considered taking a sip from her glass of wine. The day I finished my first building design, a small office complex, nothing special to anyone else, but it was mine. From foundation to rooftop, she leaned closer, the candlelight making her eyes sparkle. Your turn. The day I saw my first book in print. I smiled at the memory before Scott, before the bestseller lists, when it was just me and my words. Her fingers brushed mine as she reached for the wine bottle between us. And this time, neither of us pulled away. We sat there, barely touching the connection between us, as warm and real as the firelight. Ruby, She whispered, her voice husky in the darkness, and then the lights blinked back on the spell broken. We blinked at each other, suddenly awkward in the harsh electric light. Isabel stood first. Should check the breakers. Make sure everything's stable. I nodded, watching her retreat, the ghost of her touch still warm on my skin. 2 weeks at Pinewood Inn had changed something fundamental in me. I was writing again, not the travel book my publisher expected, but something honest and raw about starting. Over my editor would probably have a coronary when I finally returned her calls, but for the first time in years, the words felt like mine alone. I was making my way down to breakfast when I noticed Isabel at the reception desk staring at a weathered package with a confused expression. Warning, I called. Something interesting come in. She held up the package addressed to the owner. Pinewood and no return address. Secret admirer, I teased, trying to ignore the ridiculous pang of jealousy the thought provoked. Doubtful, she sliced open the package with a letter opener, revealing a battered metal box inside. This looks ancient. The box contained a bundle of yellowing letters tied with faded ribbon, several black and white, photographs, and what appeared to be a small diary. Oh my. Isabel whispered, lifting one of the photos. It showed 2 women standing on Pinewood's front porch, arms around each other's waists, their posture intimate, despite the formal clothing of the early 1950s. Is that your grandmother? I asked, peering over her shoulder. The scent of her shampoo, something herbal and subtle, momentarily distracted me. Yes, Isabel's voice held wonder. Margaret Clark. But I don't know who the other woman is. She flipped the photo. Over in faded ink, someone had written Maggie and Rose, summer 1952. Isabella untied the ribbon around the letters with careful fingers. The first one began, "My dearest Maggie," and was signed simply, "Forever yours, Rose." "These are love letters," Isabel said softly, her cheeks coloring slightly as her eyes scanned the passionate words. "Your grandmother and this woman, Rose, they were lovers." Isabel looked up, her blue eyes wide with surprise. I had no idea. We spent the morning poring over the contents of the box. The letters revealed a passionate relationship, spanning nearly a decade, conducted largely in secret. Rose had been a musician who stayed at the inn during summer tours, returning year after year. To the woman she couldn't publicly claim, this explained so much. Isabel murmured, reading through the small diary. Grandmother never remarried after grandfather died young. I always thought she was just devoted to his memory, but she had another great love. I finished a forbidden swan in those times. The most recent letter was postmarked 1961. After that, nothing. No explanation for the separation, no indication of what had happened to Rose. Why would someone send these now, Isabel wondered. And who had them all this time? As we were placing the items in the box, a small key fell from between the pages of the diary. Old-fashioned and ornate. I wonder what this opens, I amused, holding it up to the light. Isabel took at her fingers, brushing. Mine, I think I might know. She led me to the 3rd floor, to a corridor I hadn't explored before. At the end was a door I'd assumed was a closet. Isabel inserted the key, and to both our surprise, it turned smoothly. The room beyond was small, but filled with light from a round window. It had clearly once been an artist's studio. An easel stood dusty in one corner, and canvases were stacked against the walls. I never knew this was here. Isabel breathed. Grandmother told me this section was unstable, needed repairs. I never questioned it. We carefully examined the canvases, finding portrait after portrait of Margaret Clark, Isabel's grandmother, painted with unmistakable love and admiration, and in the corner, signed simply R, were paintings of the 2 women together in poses that left no doubt about their relationship. They had to hide, Isabel said softly. All those years. I watched emotions play across her face, wonder, sadness, understanding. "Are you okay?" I asked. She nodded. Slowly, just processing. Grandmother practically raised me, and I never knew this essential truth about her. We carried several paintings downstairs, setting them on the dining room table for better examination. Lucas arrived for his shift and whistled low when he saw them. Where'd these come from? He asked, studying a particularly striking portrait of Margaret. Isabel explained about the package as I made coffee for the three of us. Lucas seemed unsurprised by the revelation about his grade. "And makes sense," he said, accepting a steaming mug from me. She used to get these letters that would make her smile for days. She'd never say who they were from. As Lucas and Isabel shared memories trying to piece together this newly discovered history, I felt my phone vibrate. Scott again, his third call today. I excused myself to the lobby to answer, if only to tell him to stop calling. Finally, he snapped when I picked up. "Where are you the publishers going ballistic?" "We have contractual obligations, Ruby, I repeated. "There's no we anymore, Scott. The divorce finalized that the contract says Torres and Torres. That's still both of us. His voice took on the wheedling tone I'd grown to hate. "Look, we need to discuss how to handle this. Your little writer's retreat or whatever has gone on long enough. I'm working on something new. Something new won't pay the bills or satisfy our contract." He paused. "I heard you're staying at some failing in Des Moines. Seriously, Ruby, that's your grand inspiration." A chill ran through me. "How do you know where I am? And credit card statements still come to the apartment?" He sounded smug. "Come home. We can work this out professionally, even if the personal side is over." I ended the call without answering a knot forming in my stomach. Scott knowing my whereabouts made me uneasy in a way I couldn't articulate. When I returned to the dining room, Isabel was alone, carefully wrapping the paintings. "Everything okay?" she asked, noticing my expression. "My ex?" I explained. "He's tracking my spending, knows I'm here, feels invasive." Isabel's face darkened. "That's not right. It's fine, just divorce, my signs is." I changed the subject, nodding toward the paintings. "What will you do with these?" She ran a gentle finger over the canvas, showing her grandmother and Rose embracing display. "Them honor their story." She looked up at me, something vulnerable in her expression. "It makes me think about my own life. The truths I've been afraid to acknowledge, like what my heart quickened." She hesitated, then spoke carefully. "I've never been entirely honest with myself about who I am, what I want." Her eyes met mine. "My marriage failed for many reasons, but one was that I was living a life that never quite fit. The air between us felt charged." I thought about my own marriage, how toward the end Scott's touch had left me cold, how I'd thrown myself into work to avoid intimacy, I think. I said slowly, "We might have more in common than struggling with ex-husbands." Isabel's phone rang, breaking. The moment she answered, her expression quickly shifting to concern. "Slow down, Lucas," she said. "What's leaking? Where?" She mouthed emergency to me and hurried out, leaving me alone with the paintings of two women who had loved in secret decades ago. I studied their faces in the portraits, wondering what advice they might give us if they could speak. "Be brave. Perhaps life is shorter than you think." Over the next few days, Isabel and I fell into a comfortable routine of researching her grandmother's secret romance. We hung two of the paintings in the lobby, Margaret in a summer dress by the inn's garden, and Rose at the piano, her expressions. Serene guests commented on their beauty, unaware of the story behind them. "I found something," Isabel announced one afternoon, entering the library where I'd been writing. She held a small leather-bound address book. It was hidden in grandmother's old desk. "There's an entry for Rose Madigan with an address in Chicago. Chicago, that's not far." "Maybe we could already searched her name online," Isabel interrupted. "She passed away 10 years ago." Her voice softened, but she had a daughter, Elizabeth. "Madigan's still living in Chicago." I closed my laptop. "Are you thinking of contacting her?" Isabel nodded, her expression both nervous and determined. "I want to understand what happened between them, why they separated. Who sent the package, LOL. "Go with you," I offered immediately, "to Chicago." Her eyes met mine. Grateful, and I'd like that. We made plans to drive to Chicago the following day. That night, my phone rang. Scott again. "I've been patient, Ruby," he said without preamble. "The publisher's threatening to sue for breach of contract. Either you come home and finish the book, or we lose everything I am writing. I insisted, just not what they're expecting. They don't want your personal journey or whatever this is. They want the tourist travel series that sells. Maybe I don't care what sells anymore, his voice turned cold. Then you don't care about your career. I've scheduled a meeting with them next week. Be there or they'll terminate the contract and demand repayment of the advance. The threat hit like a physical blow. I couldn't repay the advance. Not after the divorce had halved my savings fund, I said. Finally, I'll be there. I didn't sleep that night, torn between obligations to my past and the pull of something new forming here at Pinewood. And Isabel had awakened something in me, not just desire, but courage to find my authentic voice again. The next morning, we set out for Chicago and Isabel's aging. Subaru, the 3-hour drive, passed quickly as we shared stories of our childhoods, our dreams before life had complicated them. Always wanted to build homes, not office buildings, Isabel confessed, places that would hold families, witness lives unfolding. Why didn't you? The money was in commercial work, she shrugged. Then I met Daniel, and his vision became mine somehow until it wasn't. We found Elizabeth Madigan's brownstone in an elegant Chicago neighborhood. She was in her 60s with her mother's eyes and a warm smile that instantly put us at ease. I wondered if someone from Pinewood would ever come. She said, ushering us into a living room filled with books and art. When I sent the package, you sent it? Isabel asked, surprised. Elizabeth nodded. Mother left instructions in her will. The materials were to be returned to Pinewood Inn upon my own retirement. I was a professor at Northwestern until last month. But why wait all these years? I asked. Mother believed some stories belonged to their proper time. Elizabeth poured tea for us. She never stopped loving your grandmother, Isabel. But in those days, 2 women couldn't build an open life together, especially not in a small town. What happened in 1961? Isabel asked. The letters stopped. Elizabeth's expression turned sad. My father discovered their relationship. He was politically connected, threatened to expose them, ruin your grandfather's memory. Your grandmother chose to protect her family's reputation. She asked Mother not to contact her again. That's heartbreaking. I murmured. Mother understood. Different times. Elizabeth retrieved a photo album, but they found each other again later after I was grown. They had 15 more years together, very discreetly before your grandmother passed. Isabel's eyes widened. Grandmother took trips twice yearly to visit old friends. I never questioned it. They were careful. Elizabeth smiled, but so very much in love. She showed us photographs of the 2 women in their later years on a beach at a cabin in the woods, always seemingly caught in private moments of joy. Mother wanted you to know the truth, Isabel, to understand that love finds a way, even against impossible odds. Elizabeth squeezed her hand. The room where the paintings were hidden. That was their sanctuary during those summer visits. Isabel was quiet on the drive back, processing everything we'd learned. I let her think, watching the landscape blur past my window. I'm going to create a special suite, she announced suddenly, the Rose Suite, using grandmother's hidden room, displaying their story. That sounds beautiful, I said, a tribute to them, to love that persists. Her eyes flicked briefly to me before returning to the road. Even when the world isn't ready for it. Back at the inn, the evening weather report warned of a major snowstorm approaching. Guests hurriedly changed travel plans, checking out early to avoid being stranded. You should probably leave too, Isabel told me as we carried the paintings back upstairs. If you need to make that publisher meeting. I hesitated at the door to the hidden room. I'm not sure I want to go. Your career is changing like everything else in my life. I met her gaze steadily. I'm not the same person who checked in here weeks ago. Something electric passed between us as we stood in the doorway. Isabel took a step closer, then stopped herself. We should secure these paintings before the storm hits, she said, her voice slightly unsteady. We worked together, arranging the art in the room, planning how to transform it into a guest suite that honored Margaret and Rose's love story. As evening fell, snow began soft at first, then increasingly heavy. Last weather update says roads will be impassable by midnight. Lucas called up the stairs, just had our final guest check out. Isabel turned to me, looks like we're snowed in. The inn grew quiet as Lucas left and darkness fell. The snow outside muffled all sound, creating a cocoon of silence around us. We remained in the hidden room, surrounded by paintings that testified to a love that had endured. Despite everything, Ruby, Isabel said softly, I need to tell you something. What is it? I haven't felt this way in maybe ever. Her voice was barely audible. With you, I feel like I found something I didn't know I was missing. I moved closer, my heart pounding. I feel it too. Our eyes locked, and this time neither of us pulled away. When our lips finally met, it was like answering a question I hadn't known how to ask. Her mouth was soft against mine, tentative at first, then with growing confidence. My hands found her waist as hers tangled in my hair. The paintings around us seemed to bear silent witness as decades of hidden desire in this very room found echo in our embrace. Outside, the snow continued to fall, sealing us away from the world and its demands, if only for this perfect, stolen night. Morning arrived. With blinding whiteness outside and uncomfortable clarity within, I woke alone in my room, the memory of Isabel's lips on mine still vivid. We'd kissed for what felt like hours in that hidden room before reluctantly separating to our own beds. Both of us overwhelmed by the sudden shift in our relationship. My phone showed 3 missed calls from my editor and a text from Scott, and publisher meeting moved up tomorrow, non-negotiable reality. Crashed back like ice water. I had 24 hours to decide which life I wanted. The established career I'd built with Scott, or this new uncertain path that pulled at me with increasing strength. I found Isabel in the kitchen making coffee in the gray morning light. She looked up when I entered, her expression a mixture of vulnerability and determination. About last night, she began. I don't regret it, I said. Quickly, not for a second. Relief washed over her face. Neither do I. We stood looking at each other. The coffee forgotten, the snowstorm had transformed the inn into an island, temporarily free from outside pressures. The publisher moved up my meeting. I finally said, tomorrow in Chicago. Isabel's smile faded. You're leaving? I have to at least show up. My entire career depends on it. The words sounded hollow even to me. And after her question hung in the air between us, before I could answer, my laptop pinged with an incoming email. I opened it to find a lengthy message from Scott outlining everything I stood to lose if I didn't cooperate. Our joint book deal, royalties from previous works, my literary reputation. He's threatening me, I said, turning the screen so Isabel could see, using our joint contract as leverage. She read it, her expression darkening. He can't do this. Legally, he might be able to. We were stupid enough to sign everything as a partnership. I closed the laptop with more force than necessary. I need to finish this manuscript, the travel book. Isabel's voice was careful, neutral. That's what they're expecting. I ran a hand through my hair in frustration, what I've been avoiding for months. Isabel turned away, busying herself with the coffee pot. When she handed me a mug, her fingers deliberately avoided touching mine. I understand, she said, though her tone suggested otherwise. Your career comes first, Isabel. You should pack if you're planning to leave today. The plows should have the main roads cleared by noon. She left the kitchen before I could respond. I stared into my coffee, feeling the life I'd briefly glimpsed with her already slipping away. Upstairs, I opened the leather journal she'd given me, flipping through the pages I'd filled. My writing was different here, raw, honest, alive in a way my commercial work had never been. This was the book. I wanted to write, not another glossy travel tome with Scott's name attached by midday. The snowplows had indeed cleared the main roads. I packed my bag. Slowly, each item a reluctant step back toward my old life. Isabel had disappeared into her office. The closed door, a clear signal she didn't want to talk. Lucas caught me in the lobby as I prepared to leave. She likes to pretend she's tough, he said without preamble, but she's been hurt enough. I'm not trying to hurt her, I protested. I just have obligations I can't ignore. Don't we all? He shrugged. Question is which obligations matter most in the end. I left my key at the empty reception desk, unwilling to disturb Isabel for a proper goodbye. The drive to Chicago felt longer than before, the Uber silent, except for the occasional update on road conditions. My hotel room near the publisher's office was sleek, impersonal, and achingly lonely after the character-filled warmth of Pinewood. I spent the evening trying to work on the travel manuscript, forcing words onto the page that felt as hollow as my excuses for leaving at 3 o'clock and I gave up and pulled out Isabel's journal instead. The words flowed easily, then not a travel guide, but a story about discovering yourself in unexpected places, about having the courage to choose a new path when the familiar one no longer fits. Morning arrived too quickly. I dressed in the only professional clothes I brought, a blazer and slacks that suddenly felt like a costume. When Scott met me in the hotel lobby, his smile was confident, triumphant. "You look terrible," he said by way of greeting. This end must be as bad as it looked online. I ignored the jab. Let's get this over with. The publishing house occupied 3 floors of a gleaming downtown building. Our editor Vivian greeted us with the practiced warmth of someone about to deliver an ultimatum. "Ruby Scott," she said, leading us to a conference room. "We've been very patient." Scott slid smoothly into his pitch, explaining our progress on the new book, making promises I hadn't agreed to. I sat silently watching him spin the same charm that had once captivated me, now transparently manipulative. "Ruby has been gathering material for the Midwest chapter," he said, as if my time at Pinewood had been research rather than transformation. "We're back on track now." Ruby Vivian turned to me. "You've been concerning quiet. Are we good to meet the new deadline?" I looked at Scott's expectant face, at Vivian's professionally masked impatience, at the contract sitting between us, requiring Torres and Torres to deliver another bestseller. "No," I said finally, "we're not good." Scott's expression hardened. "Ruby, I'm not writing that book." I pulled out Isabel's journal, placing it on the table. "I'm writing this one alone." "That's not what we contracted for," Vivian said coldly. "Then I'll return the advance." I didn't know how I'd manage it, but the words felt right, and Scott can write whatever travel guide he wants. "You're making a massive mistake," Scott hissed as Vivian stepped out to consult with legal. "No," I said with surprising calm. "I made the mistake when I let you convince me your voice and mine were the same thing." I left the publishing house feeling simultaneously terrified and free. My career might be in shambles, but for the first time in years, I was making choices based on my own truth rather than expedience. Back at the hotel, I hesitated only briefly before checking out and calling for a car back to Des Moines, to Pinewood, to Isabel, if she'd still have me. The return drive felt like coming home. I hadn't texted or called ahead, unsure what to say that wouldn't sound hollow after I'd chosen to leave. When the inn came into view, its Victorian silhouette familiar after just a few weeks, my heart raced with uncertainty. The lobby was empty when I entered, the Christmas tree lights twinkling in the early evening gloom. I stood for a moment, suitcase in hand, wondering if I'd made yet another mistake. "And you're back." Isabel's voice came from the doorway to her office, surprise and caution in her tone. "I couldn't sign the contract." I said simply, "Couldn't pretend anymore, and your career in shambles." Probably. I managed to smile. Turns out some things matter more. She crossed the lobby, slowly stopping just out of reach. "Like what?" "Like being honest about who I am, what I want." I met her gaze steadily. "Who I want." Isabel's expression remained guarded. "You left Ruby, I know, and I'm sorry." I stepped closer. "I've spent years living someone else's version of my life. I don't want to do that anymore." "What do you want to finish the book I started here, the real one?" I took another step to see where this thing between us might go. For a long moment, she said nothing, and I feared I'd return too late. That pride or self-protection would make her turn away. Instead, she closed the distance between us, her hands framing my face as her lips found mine. And a kiss that felt like coming home and embarking on an adventure all at once. "Don't run away again," she whispered against my mouth. I won't. I promised. I'm exactly where I want to be 6 months. Can change everything. Spring had melted into early summer, the grounds of pine wood and bursting with new growth that matched the transformation within its walls. My real book, sat on Isabel's desk, the final manuscript ready for submission to a small publisher, who'd shown interest after reading sample chapters, not a travel guide, but a memoir of sorts about finding authenticity in unexpected places. I titled it The Hidden Room, in honor of where this journey had truly begun. They're going to love it, Isabel said, wrapping her arms around me from behind as I stared anxiously at the package, waiting to be mailed. And you have to say that I teased, leaning into her embrace. Weren't your bias, proudly, so she kissed my neck, sending the same shivers down my spine that I'd felt the first time and every time since. The inn had changed too. Isabel had used Margaret and Rosa's story to create the lover's suite, the hidden room, transformed into a romantic retreat that had become our most requested. Accommodation photographs and paintings of the two women adorned the walls, their story shared with guests who invariably found it moving. Word had spread, travel blogs featured the inn as a hidden gem with heart. Bookings had steadily increased, especially after a popular LGBTQ+ travel site named Pinewood, one of the 10 most romantic historic inns, said, "The summer bookings are almost full," Isabel said as we walked through the garden she'd painstakingly restored. "We might actually turn a profit this year." I repeated, savoring the word. Somewhere along the way, Isabel's dreams had become mine too, just as mine had become hers. Not that our path had been without obstacles. Scott had contested our divorce settlement after I walked away from our publishing contract, dragging out legal proceedings that drained both my energy and savings. My former publisher had threatened a lawsuit over the advance, only backing down when I'd leveraged some uncomfortable truths about Scott's minimal contribution to our co-authored works. There had been nights Isabel had held me through, tears of frustration, and days I'd encouraged her when the inn's ancient infrastructure created yet another expensive emergency. But we'd faced each challenge together, finding strength neither of us had known alone. Ruby. Isabel's voice pulled me from my thoughts. She stood beneath the trellis we'd built together, surrounded by climbing roses just beginning to bloom. "Can we talk?" Something in her tone made my heart quicken. "Everything okay? Better than okay?" She took my hands in hers. "I've been thinking about something, Elizabeth." Madigan said about how her mother and your grandmother found a way to love each other despite everything. I nodded, waiting. "They lost so many years hiding." Isabel continued, "I don't want to hide anything about us, not ever." "Neither do I," agreed. Though uncertain where she was heading, Isabel reached into her pocket and pulled out a small velvet box that made my breath catch. I almost waited until Christmas, she said, to bring us full circle from when we met at the market, but I realized I don't want to wait another day. She opened the box to reveal a vintage ring with a sapphire surrounded by tiny diamonds. This was my grandmother's. She left it with a note saying it should go to someone who understands that love is worth fighting. For Isabel's voice trembled slightly. "I think she'd approve of it being yours." Tears blurred my vision as she continued, "Ruby Torres, will you marry me, build a life here with me, fill this old inn with more stories and love than it's ever known?" "Yes," I whispered, then louder, "yes." The ring slid perfectly onto my finger as if it had been waiting for me all along. Isabel's kiss tasted of future promises and present joy, deepening until we both remembered we were standing in view of the breakfast room windows. That evening we celebrated by closing the inn to guests and hosting a small gathering. Lucas, a few local friends we'd made, and Elizabeth Madigan, who'd driven in from Chicago for the occasion, to Margaret and Rose Elizabeth toasted, raising her glass, who would be overjoyed to see love flourishing freely in these walls at last, and to finding your voice. Lucas added, nodding to my manuscript on the mantelpiece, "Both of you." Later, as Christmas lights twinkled in the town square, left up year-round after Isabel had successfully petitioned the city council, we strolled hand in hand, stopping to Admire a handcrafted ornament display, much like the one where our fingers had first brushed last. December, and here a year ago today. Isabel mused, and she checked into my failing inn with a broken heart and empty pages and found everything I wasn't looking for. I finished brushing my lips. Against hers beneath the market lights, the kiss deepened heedless of passers by both. Of us intoxicated by the freedom to love openly where Margaret and Rose had been forced to hide. When we returned to Pinewood, Isabel led me to the lovers. Suite now decorated with photographs of not just her grandmother and Rose, but newer ones. Of us at the Chicago waterfront in the inn's garden laughing in the kitchen. A visual chronicle of love found and nurtured. I've been thinking, I said as we lay tangled together later, the moonlight casting shadows across the bed. We should expand the in-story collection and invite guests to share their own tales of love that persevered. Isabel propped herself on her elbow, her face soft in the dim light, a living anthology, something like that. The inn could become known for it, a place where love stories are honored, preserved. I love it. She kissed me softly, and I love you outside snow began to fall. The first of the season, 1. Years since I'd arrived broken and lost. Now the ring on my finger caught the moonlight, and the woman beside me held my heart, and the words that had once failed me flowed freely onto pages filled with truth. The Pinewood Inn had found its second chance. So had we. Together we were writing a story Margaret and Rose could only have dreamed of, one without hiding, without shame, without endings disguised as goodbyes. Merry Christmas almost. Isabel whispered against my lips, the first of many I promised, knowing with absolute certainty that some love stories really do end exactly as they should, not with goodbye, but with a promise of forever.